Hello, everyone. This is John Patrick Fahey here today with the Academic Hour. I am joined by none other than the famous or infamous Germinal Gerard Van. Germinal, how are you? How's it going today?
Hi John, how's it going? I'm just happy to be here. Honestly, it's an honor that you invited me on your platform, and I can't wait.
Me too, man. Me too. So, yeah, the first show. You have you're the honored guest for the first program. Of course, it would be you, right? None other than you. So let's. I like your videos where you talk and your talks where you talk about your personal kind of development, right? Where you talk about your the development of your thought process and how your views have kind of shifted over the years, new things,
Yeah,
new interests you've gained, new stuff you've done. Could you kind of give my viewers a bit of a background on that?
yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire.
Mhm.
It's funny because you're the person who knows me more than anybody else. But just for the audience sake, let me refresh. Let me give them my background. So I was born and raised in the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire in 1990, and I pursued my primary and secondary education back home. And there in high school we have majors, and I told you that so many times, but we have majors, and I majored in
Same as the French system, right? It's essentially,
exactly,
yeah, they copied
yeah,
it.
and in most European countries. And so I majored in mathematics, physics, and biology, and chemistry. So physics and chemistry, they were like one course together.
Yeah, like a physical chemistry, physical science class.
Exactly. But then I was kind of decent in math, but I love physics, but I couldn't do it. I was horrible at it, and biology was not my thing.
Hmm.
So I took the baccalaureate exam and I miserably failed. And
Hmm.
so I switched courses. So I moved to the more qualitative side, so philosophy, literature, history,
Hmm.
because back then I was more driven by politics. And
Exactly.
so I wait, what'd you say?
Exactly. I think
Uh,
a lot of us have always been thinking about politics going back to when we're 15, 16. So
exactly.
no surprise.
Yeah. So I was very driven by politics. I was convinced that I was going to be the president of my country. So I
Hmm.
graduated and then I came to the US and straight to study political science. And you were one of the first person that I met. You were
I
actually
remember
my
that. Yeah.
first my first real friend in the United States. That's why our friendship is still extremely strong up to today after what,
After so
10
that
years?
yeah, 10 years. I think we met in 2010, right? We
Yeah,
met
in 20. Yeah. It's gonna be 11 years
fall.
in October.
Yeah, we met fall of 2010. Yeah.
Yeah, fall of 2010. That's when we met. So as you remember, like I started initially with the intensive English program
Yeah, I
because I'm not
remember
a
that.
native. I'm not an English native speaker. So I did that for a year, and then over the summer, I kicked off my political science degree, and then and I graduated and I minored in philosophy and French literature, and I graduated in 2014. Then a year after, I went for my master's at, at the George Washington University, did a master's in political management. So for people who don't know what political management is, it's basically applied politics. So it's for anybody who wants to work as a professional in politics. So if you want to work as a chief of staff of a senator or the
Mhm.
assistant of a representative or whatever,
Or work on
this
campaigns.
exact on campaigns, political consulting, this is the degree. And you guys can Google it. The Graduate School of Political Management is the number one school of applied politics in the US.
Nice.
So so yeah, it's a pretty good school. And so I graduated from that and I did this kind of like uh I wasn't very passionate about it. I just did it because I wanted to go to grad school. I need to find a school. I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
on the
I think that's something that's in the back of a lot of our minds, right? You just kind of want to go to grad school at some point, You don't care.
yeah, exactly.
You want to you want to
Exactly.
you want to get in, you want to go, and you want to try out the waters. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So that's what I did, and then so after graduation, I was interested in going to law school. So what happened? the big shift was that at first I wanted to go back to Ivory Coast to do politics there. I sworn on everyone's head that I was going to be president. But something happened and I completely shift. And the reason why is that I realized that my way of thinking would not be compatible with the way people think back home.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that it would be extremely problematic, so it wouldn't worth the cost of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There were just a lot of cultural differences, and uh, to 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 put it simply, I don't believe back home the mentality is more collectivist, and I don't believe in collectivism. So I realized that it would not be. I realized that it would not be a good fit. So, but I was still interested in politics. So I thought that I would go in politics in the US. I'm more accustomed to the US mentality, the culture. I understand how the political and legal system work here. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would go to politics. That's why I wanted to go to law school because, this is the typical path in the US. You want to become a politician. The first thing you do, you get a degree in political science, then you go to law school. Kamala Harris, Jeff Sessions, all these guys, that's the pure product of American politics. So that's what I wanted to do. I took the LSAT 3 times and I didn't do well. I mean, I got into two law schools, 2 or 3 law schools, but they were not the greatest either. And plus, at the time, I was in the process of getting my green card too. So I wasn't eligible to take loans or anything.
And you were
And
married.
so that's, yeah,
And
I
you were
was
married by
married,
the
but
way.
yeah, yeah.
So at that
And
point
that's
too,
when I was,
it's hard to and then when you're married, you have a life, and your wife is working, and she's set in a certain career. It's hard to just supplant your whole family and just take off and go to some new law school halfway across the country. It's harder to do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, my wife she would not accept that at all. So, uh, yeah, the law schools I got into, they were not in Chicago.
Yeah.
So there was no way. It was just her and I going somewhere in the country where we know nobody. So at first I was frustrated, but I realized that in life, when things sometimes don't happen, it's for a good reason. And that's when I started to write. And when I was writing at first, my writings were more toward political science, legal philosophy. They were more driven by ideology. And then I started getting into economics. And I remember, John, you wrote the foreword of my fifth book,
I
The
did.
Efficiency of Capitalism. Although your ideological views don't align with mine, but I truly appreciate that you still wrote the foreword of this book.
Mhm.
And then that was my real first book of economics, but I was approaching economics from a philosophical standpoint. And I did that for a couple books until on my 13th book, which is the economic development of West Africa in the 21st century. That's when I started applying quantitative methods. And that was my complete shift from normative economics to quantitative economics. But what even drove me to economics was libertarianism, because I explained in one of my videos that libertarianism is the political philosophy that is very driven into economics. If you discuss with libertarians, their the focus is always on the free market economics. Oh, dude, you don't understand economics, the free market. They will always tell you that those lines, and they will talk about natural rights. So personally, the natural rights part I never cared about. I'm like, I'm not into the those natural rights thing. That's not my issue. What I was more focused on was the economic side of it, and that's the one thing that libertarianism made me become is an economist. Because I was a Republican before moving to libertarianism, but it was because of Donald Trump and the way he transformed the Republican Party. I did not see myself in the Republican Party anymore.
Mhm.
So I could not associate myself with that. So that's when I drove more into libertarianism. And then when I got into libertarianism, at first I realized I was becoming quite radical in
Mhm.
my views. I was even flirting with anarcho-capitalism to some
Mhm.
extent, but then I came back to my senses.
I think that's a pretty big movement in the Libertarian Party. Would you say anarcho-capitalism? Would you say that's a
Yeah.
big? Uh, I would say kind of anecdotally that looks like it's a big component of that movement. Do you still consider yourself to be a libertarian? Libertarian? Are you still registered with the party?
Okay, John. To be honest, I personally do not consider myself a libertarian anymore. I consider myself a classical liberal.
Classical
That's
liberal.
why I am. I believe in limited government. I believe in the rule of law.
Mhm.
I believe in economic freedom. I believe in individual rights and property rights. That's all. Those snap things, natural, blah blah. No, I'm not into this epistemology, political. No, I'm not into that.
Let,
Yeah.
uh,
So
let's talk about the Libertarian Party.
sure.
You worked for, I'm sorry, but I forget the name. It was your
Joshua
mentor.
Flynn.
Yeah, he passed away. And I'm sorry to hear that. He seemed like uh, genuinely a good man. I didn't know him personally, never met him, but he seemed like a good person. I didn't agree with all of his platform 100%, but based on the district where he was running and the kind of corrupt nature of who had been running that, who had been in charge of that district. If I lived there, I probably would have voted for him. And he was, and the time that he ran, he was the only opposition candidate. Right? They didn't. There wasn't
Yes.
like a Republican candidate. So yeah, I probably would have voted for him. Didn't agree with him 100%, but I think it's good to shake things up.
Yeah.
With with the Libertarian Party, sometimes I kind of see uh, some inconsistencies with how it approaches its own ideology. I remember back in kind of that era when we first met, 2010, 2011 to 2012. It was when Ron Paul had been running for trying to get the Republican nomination, right, to run for president against Obama in 2012. And so that was kind of my first introduction to libertarianism, the libertarian movement. What do we have to say about though when the Black Lives Matter movement was starting? And traditionally, the Libertarian Party has always put itself as kind of being anti-government, anti-taxes, anti-funding government programs. But then when Black Lives Matter kind of started up and started saying defund the police, they seem to really take they really seem to kind of take a step back from that rather than trying to push that issue as well. Even though, from what I understand, it would be kind of consistent with the ideology they seek to promote. So, what are your thoughts on that? Is there kind of an inconsistency in the Libertarian Party's ideology regarding that, or is it
I
consistent?
think,
I'm just
yeah.
not seeing, and I'm just not seeing it.
No, no. I think no. You have a point. It's kind of inconsistent, and this is what you will see on the net. People always arguing with each other about who's a real libertarian and who is not,
Mhm.
instead of uniting and creating a solid party that will win elections. They barking at each other about you're fake, you're no, you're right, and blah blah blah. So libertarians, what I find inconsistent about them is that they claim to be anti-government, but on some social issues, specifically the right libertarians, are they support uh, government innovation because when you look at the progressive, right, the progressive they believe in government to for social change. For instance, like LGBT, abortion, and all of that. Progressives say people should have a right to that. What does it mean? It means that the government should protect people having the right to do those things. And libertarians, although they say yes, people should have the right to do that, they also agree with the fact that the government should support that, although they're against government. So I have to be honest, the most consistent, logically consistent libertarians are actually the ANCAPs. Because I have to give them that. I don't agree with them, but they're very logically consistent. They say, hey, because during the day you have one foot out, and then the night you have one foot in. Anarchists are like either you have your both feet out or you have them in, but you can't be, you can bounce across the road. And yeah, many libertarians they're inconsistent on some issues. And I so this was one thing that kind of bothered me too about libertarianism. But it was what I really did not like about libertarianism is their insistence on the nap. The nap is the most foolish and
What is the NAP?
unrealistic.
Can you give us a little background on what that is? The NAP.
Yeah, so the non-aggression pact
Hmm.
is an idea. It's a libertarian idea claiming that everything should be voluntary.
Hmm.
Like no one should be able to coerce you to do anything you don't want to do, and you cannot coerce anybody else. Yes, it makes sense, but the reality is different. What is coercion? Coercion is not just physical coercion. Even persuasion is coercion. When I'm persuading you to do something that you initially didn't want to do and you end up doing it, I coerced you. I did not use force, but I forced you to do something out of that was against your will.
Hmm.
That is coercion. When you live under the roof of your parents, you're being coerced every time. Your parents say, hey, go to bed at 8. So long as you live under my roof, you follow my rules. I mean, that's the way life is. Until you can afford your own place, you don't you don't talk back to me. This is coercion because you're not free.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah, go
What
ahead, John.
one issue I saw too was the notion of right to work, pushing right to work legislation, um, and this has been pushed in a lot of states that have Republican governors, Republican legislatures. It's pushing the idea that with unions and their negotiations with their prospective companies, people should be allowed to opt out of being in the unions, even if that was part of the negotiation the union had with the company. So, is the government kind of stepping in between the negotiation between these two entities, between a union and between a company? Is that contrary? Is that contrary to kind of libertarian ideology? Because I always saw that as actually going against libertarian ideology, because you have the government stepping in and then saying that a union and a company can't have this agreement. People should be able to opt out of the union if they work for the company. I'm
Yeah.
wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's contradictory once again because the fundamental basis of libertarianism is that government is a problem. Libertarians, not all libertarians support the abolition of government. It's of course the ANCAPs, the most radical ones that support the abolition of government. But libertarians believe that the role of the government is simply to protect their rights, to protect the access to property, and to enforce contracts. And of course, to have an army and stuff like that. So the very regal functions of government. So government stepping in to dictate how a negotiation should be conducted between a company and the union. The government does that because there are labor laws. And and as a libertarian, if you support that, you of course contradicting yourself. And there are many libertarians who are contradicting themselves on that. Libertarians, they're trying so hard to be consistent. The more focus on being principled about their views than winning elections, in my opinion. And that has been the struggle so far because they know that they're contradicting themselves on some issues.
Mhm.
It's hard to be very consistent on every issue, and that's why I always tell people you have to be flexible. Take every issue on its own and see where you lies, because reality is very different than political philosophy. Political philosophy, it's like a linear equation, kind of. It's like a linear model. It's the outcome variable plus all the independent variables, you add to it and everything is fine. But the reality is that every variable, every independent variable that you deal with has its own complexity. So to come and act and try to act consistent out of ideology, I don't think it's realistic. I'm
Mhm.
a realistic guy, and I realized that, for instance, when I was like deep rooted into the Austrian school, uh, whenever I would argue with you or even with anyone else about government intervention, I would say no, the government should not intervene, and I would not produce any empirical evidence for it. Although the countless empirical evidence that show that government intervention is not always a bad thing. But because of the ideological thinking process of thinking that, hey, government should never step in, people become radical and they don't want to compromise or to see the reality that we live in a world where government is part of our lives.
Mhm.
Now, like,
So, so,
there's
so,
some
ba-
interventions that are worth it. Yeah.
so you've gotten into writing a lot about economics. You've gotten into writing about econometrics. You've studied economics extensively. You've read a lot about it. You've studied it. You got the degree in the professional certificate from. Well, what was it in? Was it in data analysis from Duke
From
University?
Duke.
Yeah,
Oh, so yeah, so I got a it's a non-degree certificate from Duke University. It was in statistics.
yeah.
Yeah, and then I got another certificate from UPenn from Wharton that was in quantitative modeling.
Okay, great. And so you did this all online, right?
Yeah, all online. Yeah.
So that's a big thing I see too. Do you think, and that's why I like your story so much, right? Because you don't let anything kind of hold you back. I think sometimes people get this mentality like, oh, I wasn't good at this subject in high school. I didn't like it in high school. I didn't study it in undergrad. Therefore, I'm never going to really be able to study math or use it in my life. I think some people kind of build up these barriers.
Yeah.
You, what age do you really think that you started taking math seriously? What age in your life did
So that's actually a great question. So uh, it was in 20 late 2019, early 2020. That's when my intellectual shift started to happen drastically.
you don't even, so when you're about 28, 29, right? So
Yeah.
you haven't really sat down and started. So to me, that's a huge,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
inspirational thing. I
So
think
it
that
was
people, yeah.
it, it, it was my friend Pavel who actually started uh to motivate me to get into mathematics because he studies math. And uh and I was getting tired of doing economics with political philosophy. Because, and this is one thing I'm going to say here, John, is that, you know, my problem with Austrians is that they understand economics, but they don't do it.
Hmm.
And many people think that because they understand it, they're doing it. If you're using political philosophy to do economic analysis, you're not doing economic analysis. You're just explaining what your beliefs are.
Hmm.
That's all. You're doing ideology. You're not proving anything. So what made me get into the math part was that I started learning more about Nobel laureates, why they get the Nobel Prize, what work have they done to win that prize and get that $1 million. It's not even the $1 million that, but
I think you
it's
do want the million, though. I think that was the.
no, it's just the academic rigor behind it, like how they did it, and
Well, even
and
Milton Friedman was awarded a Nobel Prize, correct?
yeah, yeah, he was in
And he and
1976.
he, in a way, I think you could say that he's a serious economist.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I don't particularly like his work. I'm not a huge fan, but some of it I am. Right? He not like things like Capitalism and Freedom. I'm not a huge fan of that book. Obviously, I think there's a lot. I think I'm not going to go into detail, but there's Capitalism Freedom where he kind of espouses his political his kind of ideology in economics, how it relates to politics. But then he's also written other works that you could say are purely economics, right?
Oh
Purely,
yeah. So for instance, the book A Monetary History of the United States, that's purely scientific.
yes.
And that's the reason why Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize, because he wrote that. He wrote also a theory of the consumption function. This book is highly mathematical and statistical. He
Mhm.
did a rigorous analysis of the consumption function to disprove Keynes.
Mhm.
And and disproving Keynes had nothing to do with ideology here. It's not about government intervention or anything. He did not agree with Keynes' approach to consumption
Mhm.
because Keynes always believed in the short run, while Milton Friedman, as a classical liberal, always believed in the long run. That's why he developed the permanent income hypothesis, and so that was one of the reasons why he won the Nobel Prize. And so I started learning a lot about Nobel laureates in economics, the work they did. I read about the work of Jan Tinbergen, Ragnar Frisch, Vasily Leontiev, John Hicks, Kenneth Arrow, Simon Kuznets, uh, uh, Lawrence Klein, James Tobin, and all these people that I never knew. There were Robert Solow, Paul Samuelson. I never knew about these people before. And then I read their work and I was like, and there's one thing I realized about their entire work. You, in order to win the Nobel Prize, not just the Nobel Prize, but in order to be considered a serious economist, you have to apply mathematics into your economic analysis. So
I
that was
I remember that. Well, the Libertarian Party in particular, they have a they hold the Austrian economists kind of on a pedestal. They idolize a lot of them.
God miss you.
So I remember once when I was in college when I went into one of the trailers at CUA. There was I can't. There was a poster, and one of our friends who were very into the libertarian movement, Ron Paul, had a poster. It had four economists on it. It had, I think it was Mises, Hayek, maybe Rothbard or something like that. And then
Yeah, always. And yeah, I think it could be,
who was the other?
if I'm not mistaken, it would be Mrs. Hayek, Rothbard, and I think Hazlitt.
Okay, I had
One of
like so they had that poster. It was like that those four that they kind of on a poster, right, in a college dorm room. So, uh, if you were to create your own poster, right, that you think of economists that you think college kids should be looking at instead of looking at the kind of non-empirical Austrian school, who would be those four economists you put on that poster?
I would put James Buchanan, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and I'll put uh, Jan Timbergen. I like Jan Timbergen a lot, although he's a socialist. But I like him a lot because and that's where people need to dissociate the scientific work of someone and his ideological views. I like Jan Timbergen because he's the one who created econometrics. He's the one who developed the first macroeconometric model.
So before him, there wasn't a lot of statistical analysis applied to economics.
Like, yeah, I mean, they were, but they were not as rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he took it to an extreme level, because what he did was he developed the macroeconomic model of the Netherlands, of Great Britain, and the United States. He created a macroeconometric model for the business cycle. So I remember his first book that he wrote about it, there was 27 equations. He even won the Nobel Prize for that. But what is amazing about it is that he did it by hand, because at his time there was no computers. He developed that
What
in the
years was he writing?
what's it?
What era? What years was he writing his?
Oh, it was in the 1930s.
1930s.
Oh yeah, there was no computer then. I mean, maybe there were, but it was,
I don't even
one
know if Neumann had his tubes out yet. Then his vacuum computer yet. So
right
forget when
exactly.
that was.
So exactly.
And
So
in any
he would,
case, that was all secret, controlled by the
yeah,
CIA. Nobody knew about it. So
right. And like
down in
it's a,
Princeton and near in New Jersey, near where I am. But
oh yeah, that's what von Neumann thought.
so as you
But
know,
yeah, like
I
Tim Bergen, that yeah, I
yeah.
was saying, yeah, Tim Bergen, that's what he did. Like it was just amazing to see because it's just the calculation just behind a simple linear regressions are pretty tedious.
Oh yeah,
It's that
doing even in chemistry. When I studied chemistry undergrad, we never did linear regression by hand, right? We always just used Excel.
exactly
you would get the data, and then once you had the data, you would put it in Excel, and you would run it.
right.
Maybe
But
that's something
people
I
like
should do
Tim
with
Bergen
my
would run it by
students.
hand.
Yeah, that's something I should probably do with my students. Make them do it by hand.
Yeah. I think it's the best. I think it's the best way. That's even how I learned econometrics. Because the way I got into econometrics was that, as I said, like, I would write my books, I would explain logically things from a philosophical standpoint, what things are. But in fact, explaining doesn't determine what things are. When you use philosophy to explain politics or economics, in fact, you're telling people about what things should be.
Hmm.
You're bringing an authoritarian, normative, narrative approach to it because you're talking about your beliefs. And in order to tell how things should be, you need to determine how things are. And to determine how things are, you have to test variables. So, and one of my friends also challenged me was saying that I wasn't doing a real economic analysis. He said, if you want to claim that you're a real economist, you have to do what those people do, predictive analysis forecasting. He said, those are the real economists. It hurt my pride, but I saw that he was right. And he was saying, you cannot do econometrics. He challenged me. I was like, okay, you're done. You are done. You are done. So that's when I started learning econometrics and I wanted to understand diligently the theory behind it. So the first thing I did was to train myself how to run a linear regression by hand.
Hmm.
And there is a famous video on YouTube for that that shows you how to run a linear regression by hand. And I'm telling people like econometrics, it's intimidating. It's really intimidating when you don't know. You see the name and it's only very sophisticated people who do that kind of thing. So you're like, oh my God, like I can't do that. But then once you see how a linear regression is ran, you're like, oh, okay, it's not that bad.
Hmm.
Because yes, like in the thing with econometrics is that you there's some papers you read and you will see some advanced techniques being used, like Bayesian econometricians, for instance. Those guys do too much. Like because Bayesian statistics is the hardest part of econometrics. And it's those models are far too advanced. Even many econometricians don't even use it like that.
Hmm.
Like to do econometrics, you just need to know how to run a multiple linear regression because that's what econometricians use the most. It's the most standard statistical model. And you need to know how to use time series data to run the autoregressive or the ARMA or ARIMA models. So all of that. If you know how to do that, pretty much you know how to do econometrics. You
Hmm.
don't need to get into the Bayesian part. The Bayesian part is for very advanced. This is for people who work at hedge funds. They were the one that would use Bayesian statistics because they work under market uncertainties conditions. So that's when Bayesian probability comes into play.
Well, just since we're talking about this now, I want to let our viewers know that the next video we do together is going to be different. Is going to be a different setup from this. What we're going to be doing is we'll do some econometric analysis together, right? So we'll do some.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
we'll figure it out what we
I
want to
cannot
do.
wait.
Some regression, some time series analysis. We'll look at some Fred data from the Federal Reserve.
Absolutely. I
Try
cannot
to
wait.
try to see some
I
things
cannot wait.
we can look at it with that. That'll be definitely a good next video. Talking about have you talking about kind of as you know, I've done a lot of work with the Democratic Party. I've been involved with them for a while, so you know that I'm into my politics. Um, I was looking at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, right? CPAC. Uh, One of the words that we're using a lot was I kept hearing cancel culture, right? Cancel culture. Um, I I re- I remember when I was a kid, right? They tried to cancel Harry Potter because they said it had witchcraft in it. They tried to cancel Sinead O'Connor when she tore up a picture of the Pope. Um, Things of this nature. Is cancel culture really something new in society, or have societies always have different groups of
No,
society
it's
kind of always
no,
try
it's
to
not.
use their pressure
No, it's
on
not
public
new.
figures?
No, cancel culture is not new. That exists for quite a while. I'm just not into the cancel culture thing. Like I rather do my scientific work. Like I think those cancel culture thing is just some high school stuff people are doing. Is I don't think it's that serious. Like people feel the need to always express their opinions. I'm like, me, if I want to express my opinion, I just write a book. You want to know my opinion? You buy the book and you will find out what I think.
But I want to.
But you know,
But
I
it's
understand the point of
yeah.
cancel culture, but I don't think it's that serious though.
Yeah, it seems the term, but my point is like it seems like the term. I think it's always been around, right? It's been around predominantly kind of from the traditional, I guess you could say, conservative side of the country. Kind of the Christian right. They've tried to propagate, try to cancel people in their own way that they disagreed with. It just seems that the term in itself has kind of only come into use now that we're talking about kind of people from the quote unquote left of the political spectrum. So so that's kind of my point. Is it really a new development? I don't think so. And do you think that
No, it's not a new
you
development.
think the
It's
term
not a
should
new.
be applied to kind of both sides of the
Yeah. No, no, because at the time of Reagan, rights were doing cancel culture on the left. Right wing Republicans were canceling uh,
Well,
liberals.
I remember too during George Bush II, W's reign, right? Anyone who disagreed with the Iraq War, or even questioned the kind of merits going in and invading Iraq, was essentially labeled as anti-American, and they tried to
Yeah,
cancel.
right.
It, right? So,
So yeah, it's definitely not new. It's just that now like egalitarianism is the new dominant philosophy. So it's just a continuation. That's what cancel culture is about. It's just that now the dominance has shifted. Now it's on the left, and if you say anything that is controversial about left wing, well, you get it canceled.
let's talk about egalitarianism, right?
Oh my
Let's talk about it in the sense of let's talk about it as individualism versus collectivism.
Sure, sure.
My question is: isn't a business a collective in some way? Can we?
You're gonna have to define
Isn't a
what
business
collectivism is, though.
isn't a business in a pure sense, right? Isn't it some form of collectivism, right?
Yeah, because it's an organization, but it's an organization that is run privately.
Mhm.
So people, the top of the business gets to decide how things should be run, how resources should be allocated,
Mhm.
and everything. But people who are in the business too, they're not compelled to be there.
Mhm.
They're just there because the human nature is that if you don't work, you starve. So they
So
have to be there.
isn't that kind of compelling people to be there then?
No, because you apply for it. You see a job online and you apply for it. No one put a gun on your head and say if you don't apply, we kill you. You decide to
Well,
apply. They
but
like your resume. Hold on. They like your resume. They call you. You guys talk. They invite you for a second interview. They like you. They believe that they can work with you. and then they propose you the job, you accept it, and they put down in front of you a contract.
Mhm.
Of course, they know you're not going to read the contract because that contract is like what, 20, 30, 50 pages. You're not going to read 50 pages of
For a
contract. You
teacher,
just
it's
sign whatever
always
you have to
like
sign
for
and
a
move on.
teacher, it's always pretty well. It's not super big. I've always read through it. You have to make sure you know your benefits.
Yeah. But,
You know what to
no,
expect.
I see what you're saying.
Mhm.
Every company has its own, have their own contract. But the point is that they know that people will not read the contract. And then they sign and then they start the job. And after a month or two, they realize that they don't really like the job. And now they feel like they're being compelled to be there otherwise.
Mhm.
So the the compelling part is the side of human nature where if you don't work, you're going to starve. So you either work for somebody else, or if you have enough financial resources, you can create your own stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to work. That's the reality of the situation. You have to work one way or another. Otherwise, you're gonna starve. You need to work in order to own a house or an apartment. In order to own a mortgage, you need to work. Otherwise, no one will give you a mortgage if you don't have a source of income. Right? You need to work in order to go to the grocery stores and buy food for the week or for the month or whatever.
Mhm.
So when it comes to the business being being collectivist, to some extent, yes, it is collectivist because there is a culture that is developed within the organization, but it is run privately, and you're free to leave if you believe that you no longer align with the values of that business being run. Compared to society or to a culture, like for instance, where Africans, we have our own culture and we do things out of tradition, although it doesn't make sense and you're compelled. Like, let me tell you this, for instance, sharing, and that's one of the reasons why I realized that I couldn't live in Africa, is that sharing is part of our culture.
Mhm.
You
Do you
have to
like to
share.
share, Germinal?
No, I
You're,
don't,
you're a
because I'm
generous.
not obligated.
You're a generous
I'm
man.
not obligated. No, I no, of course, but and that's where I'm going to make my point. I am generous, but I don't want to be compelled to share just out of because it's the culture. If I share, it's because I want to share, but I don't want to share because that's what society forced me to do. That's what my problem is, specifically with African culture. I don't have to share things because that's what the culture says. That's what the culture is. It's not written anywhere that you have to share necessarily what you have. I decide to share because I want to. I decide, for instance, to create a school or a course to help people. I'm sharing. I decide to put content on YouTube to educate people about certain stuff. I'm sharing. But you can't force me to share what I earn with my hard sweat, with my labor to
Mhm.
someone else because that's what the culture says. That's the
But
part that I don't agree.
let's look at the nature of businesses use resources, right?
Yeah.
Um, at some point, in the development of society, there was that redistribution of resources, where essentially collective power said certain people own this amount of land, are entitled to these resources, and some people don't. Um, is it does everyone in the world, in some sense, in kind of a political philosophy sense, have a right to the world's resources? Are there certain resources of the world that should be considered to be fundamental rights?
Yeah, absolutely. The commons, water, air, uh, wood, basically what we can consider raw materials,
Mm.
minerals and stuff like that. Those things should definitely be considered commons. I know Elinor Ostrom, she won the Nobel Prize in 2009. She for her work on the shelf the commons. Like, the thing with privatization is that privatization is not always good, but the main asset of privatization is efficiency. That's what privatization is about. because when you own something, only you know how to use it to maximize its utility. So you apply efficiency to it. But it's not in every situation where privatization work. And when it comes to the commons, I don't think the commons should be privatized, like water, roads, and
That is
that's
a
one thing.
big, so that is a big deviation between you and the kind of anarcho-capitalist philosophy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because and that's the thing, and that's what those guys don't understand. They don't get that privatization is good to some limits, but the efficiency that it promulgates, it's not permanent.
Mhm.
And that's what they don't understand. It's not permanent. Like life is a cycle. The economy of a country is a cycle. That's why I'm flexible about interventions, because when you think about it, interventions are short term. When you're in a recession, I have to admit you need more Keynesian economics than free market economics. And then when you're in a time of economic expansion, then you need more free market economics or more laissez-faire than Keynesian. So like everything has a side, like a cycle. Every cycle has a stage. So I can't hear you.
I don't know what happened. My microphone just like randomly muted. Um, in
Yeah.
terms of, so we're talking about regulation, right? That's essentially the topic that we're touching upon. What we see kind of with the Republican Party now is they kind of criticize regulation as a blanket. They say that we're going to get rid of regulation, we're going to undo regulation. They're not really specific about about when they talk, at least in their political speeches, they're not so specific about what types of regulation they want to get rid of. Ron Paul, in the same sense, during his 2012 campaign, he would say the same kind of things. So there's kind of a big overlap with that and the Libertarian Party. Uh, with regulation, does government have a responsibility to put regulations into place that will protect the commons? And in your view, what forms of regulation are acceptable? What are some specific regulations that are acceptable? And what's an example of a regulation that's
I
unacceptable?
see where you're going. I already see where you're going with this. You are taking me to the environmental realm. I know you because the environment is the commons. That's what it's about. And I think yes, we do need some regulations about the environment. I agree. Now the question is, should the government have an agency that runs uh, the environment itself? That's where I may not necessarily agree because of the management style.
So are you referring to like
Let me
the Environmental Protection
EPA.
Agency? Oh, really?
Yeah, the EPA. Yeah,
So you
and
disagree?
I'm not saying no. Here's the thing. I'm not saying they should necessarily be abolished, but I think the function should be reduced, and let me tell you why.
Really?
Because because a business is motivated by profit, right? For a business to live, to survive, they need to generate profit. Otherwise, they have to shut down. A government agency is not driven by profit, but is driven by the expansion of power. So the more things go wrong, the more it suited the government. Because if things go right, government has no role to play. That's their role. Their role is to come and fix what goes wrong. Why you know that famous phrase, if you ain't broken, don't fix it, right? So for government role to work, things have to be broken. So the regulations that they implement, I'm finishing my point. So the regulations that they implement, they don't necessarily do it on purpose, but those regulations they implement, in fact, create deficient outcomes that stimulate more regulations to be implemented as well. It's like doing CPR on something didn't work by using the same method of that thing that didn't work before, expecting it to work. I think that if, for instance, the environment realm was we have regulations, but we let businesses run their thing, I think they would do a far more efficient job because they know how to manage the resources. Bureaucracy doesn't know how to manage the resources because they don't create those resources. You're not going to manage something efficiently if you don't own it, if you don't create it. So there is a sense of responsibility here that I don't think the government applies it very well.
Well, let's look at some kind of the historical basis of this. Historically, is that true? Is there evidence to really back that up? I mean, we've had chemical companies operating in this country since the 1800s, right? We've had Dow, we've had DuPont. Uh, Both of these companies have uh, released kind of an unspeakable amount of pollution. They've polluted waterways. They've produced kind of these toxic Superfund sites that are, that are have been extremely disastrous to human health. We've had ExxonMobil that evidence points out to the fact that they knew about climate change happening, how their company was affecting climate change and global warming way before that was even a public issue that was really talked about. So this was back in the 1980s, back when nobody even talked about global warming. Um, is is that really true? I mean, when companies are left without environmental regulations, it seems that, especially the big ones, that they will essentially completely disregard them. I mean,
No,
I that we
yeah,
can
go ahead.
look too about after before and after the Clean Air Act, the level of smog in the level of smog and how the air quality in our major cities before and after the Clean Air Act, that was a huge shift. A lot of government regulation has been put into place on car emissions, right? So from that, they've given businesses the incentive to make cars cleaner burning, have better catalytic converters, so that when the products of combustion from the cars are not as toxic or not as bad for air quality. Is this really is there really historical basis for this? And I just want to see if I can get a specific, because you said sometimes certain regulations can lead to other regulations being put into place, and you kind of insinuated that it's this feedback loop of regulation after regulation. Could you kind of give some examples or a scenario where you've seen that happen? That's what I'm
Uh,
curious about.
Not for okay. I don't have any specific regulation for example for this environment thing. But for example, if we go uh on for instance the minimum wage, with the minimum wage, you look like
I'm
their
talking
example.
let's
No,
kind
no,
of
no,
say
no,
focus.
no, no,
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. For the environment, I don't have specifics uh examples of that. What I'm saying is
I
though,
see the minimum wage is a very different kind
no,
of.
no, no, and I totally understand that. But you were asking for example
Okay, yeah.
about regulation after regulation. That's why I was saying that for the environment, I don't have specific examples. But what I can say is that I'm not saying that whatever government does is always bad. No, no, no. I think we do need regulations for the commons, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that those regulations should be flexible enough for business to have enough freedom to run it efficiently. Because here we're talking about output, efficiency, and output. And when it comes to efficiency and output, we know that the private sector generally, I'm not saying always, but generally does a far better job than the public sector. The public sector, in fact, its job is to be a referee, to make sure that the rules are enforced. For instance, when it comes to consumer protection, I'm for the regulations of that. Absolutely. The consumer has to be protected because if you don't put regulations in place to protect the consumer, businesses will do a lot of stupid stuff. Like and they will not be held accountable for it. They will put stuff like substance in products people will eat and get sick, and they cannot sue the company for every, of course. I totally agree with that. What I'm saying is that when implementing those regulations, the government should not seek to have a monopoly over that industry, because the reality is that the government too is a competitor in that, instead of just being the referee and making sure that all the rules and principles are being applied ethically, the government cannot compete. And when you compete, you want to have a certain advantage
So what do you mean?
over your.
Do you mean in the sense of certain state-owned enterprises, or in what way
Yes,
is the
state-owned
government?
enterprises. What?
In what way is the government
I didn't hear
competing?
you.
Would you say? You still hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you. Yeah.
Maybe
So
we had a
in the
little
way,
bit of a connection. Yeah.
yeah, no, there's a bit of connection issue, but in the way that state-owned enterprise too have to meet certain quotas the way private enterprise do when it comes to output. And but the thing is that the laws and regulations being implemented have an advantage for state-owned enterprise, because is the government that implement those regulations. So in the private sector cannot do much against those regulations. They just have to comply. While I believe that in the public sector, maybe I'm being skeptical here, but I believe that in the public sector they have a way to go around those. So the
Oh yeah.
public
Well,
sector
that's.
always.
I mean, I think that's a another another issue in general. Talking about the kind of outside the kind of the regulation versus non-regulation. I do agree that when if regulations are implemented, the government we have to have a healthy democratic government doing it in the first place with healthy democratic institutions subject to public scrutiny. Sometimes that doesn't always happen depending on the nature of the government. And as we know, some governments are more democratic than others. Some are
Yeah.
much more shady than others. But let's kind of talk about like the U.S. compared to the European Union, because we could say, arguably, that the
I
European.
hate the European Union.
Oh yeah, well, we could say that the European Union does have more regulations, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It does have more regulations than the U.S., but it seems to have a healthier environment, better degree of environmental protection, and its citizens, especially in the Western European Union countries. We're talking about
Fine.
France, Italy, Spain. Well, Great Britain's no
Germany.
longer there, but Germany, especially the Netherlands, Belgium, and Ireland, and Nordic countries like Sweden, they really have a higher quality of life than individual citizens on average in the United States. They don't have uh, as big problems as big with pollution. They don't have problems as big with transportation, education. They end up having a better quality of life and not have as much kind of extreme poverty as what we witness in the United States, right? So, is there something to be said about the European model versus the American model? Have they had their successes versus us?
So one big difference is that European countries are generally homogeneous countries. The US is not. So that is the first factor
Well, the
from where
European,
you have.
the European, so but the European Union as a whole, would you say it's homogeneous?
Let me explain. What I mean by homogeneous is that every European country, each European country have a pretty much homogeneous culture.
Mhm.
It's now that, yes, people are mixing and everything, but fundamentally, European countries are built on homogeneity compared to the US. So because you were talking about like the level of the standard of living, the poverty level,
But how
why
does that
such?
how does that really affect standard of how does cultural homogeneity? I don't see the connection. How does
Yeah,
that happen? Yeah.
I'm going to try to make the connection here. When you look at the US, right? The US has many cultures, and don't forget that this country was partially built too on slavery, and slavery has lagged Black people and also how we call it Native Americans who were exterminated.
Mhm.
So you see that it's hard for those groups to catch up when it comes to the standard of living and income compared to most European countries. When you look at Sweden, they all look the same. I mean, I'm not saying that to sound ignorant, but they have like a homogeneous culture. And what the US has lived through its history here, they didn't live it the same way. So it's easier for those countries to maintain a certain living of standard. Even when you look at France, for instance, when you look at the Arabs and the blacks who came there in the 60s and the 70s, then like France started to become a little more like the US in terms of heterogeneity. And you see that unfortunately I don't have the data to look at income per capita per ethnic groups, but let me assume that blacks are at the bottom. Unfortunately, blacks wherever they are, they're usually at the bottom of the income bracket and stuff like that. Now to come back to the European Union, why they seem to be more effective is because the Europeans, at the end of the day, culturally they're homogeneous. So it was easier for them to maintain a certain level of standard compared to the United States.
So,
And now European countries are smaller too. And when it comes to implementing regulations, the smaller and the centralized. The centralization part plays an extensive role. The US is decentralized. So, to what extent the environmental policies go in the US if we live in a federal system that is decentralized? Europe is not really decentralized, it's pretty much centralized. So, whatever Brussels decide in terms of environmental policy is pretty much applied everywhere. For those who don't want to apply, they're going to get sanctions from uh, from the European Union Bureau. But in the US, yeah, go ahead. You want to say
so
something?
it seems that talking about this, you're essentially agreeing with the fundamental precepts of critical race theory, right? Applied to critical race theory applied to the U.S. versus a country like
Yeah,
Sweden, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. Because in the US, when the US was created, you already had three races involved. You have whites, you have blacks, and you have Native Americans. They were not just Europeans there. But in Europe at the time, let's take Europe at the time the US was created. So late 18th century, yeah, so the 1700s and stuff like that. Europe at the time was purely white. You won't see three different races living together. This thing is very recent. And that's what Eric Zemmour is complaining about all the time. I don't know if you know about Eric Zemmour. He's a famous French essayist. He's a right wing. He's like a Jean-Marie Le Pen
He's like a
type.
Le Pen type.
Yeah. He's against immigration. That he's famous for that. Yeah, but this is something that is recent in France and in Europe in general. But in the 1700, 1800, Europe was completely white. In the US was not completely white in the 1800. It was you already had different races living together, and it was tough.
So you think the inequality comes from some kind of form of structural racism? So like a structural racism applied to
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, and I never denied that in my writings. I never denied that in my writings. Absolutely, of course. Like you had because slavery was a legal institution. So when you as a human being you're treated as an object, well, and then they free you after all, it's kind of hard to catch up. I'm not saying that some people did catch up, but it's kind of difficult because there are laws being implemented to prevent your progress.
Mhm. Well, we had the
And that,
whole, even after slavery in the United States,
yeah,
we had Jim Crow. I think some progress has been made, but I don't think anyone would go down to Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and say that say say African Americans have the same level of standing there as they do as white Americans do, right? I
no,
don't.
no, no, no. That's
I
no,
don't think
that's foolish.
that'd be
That's
a hard
foolish.
argument to make.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we even have the Great Migration, is because, and that's why I argued in my book, The Economic Condition of Black America, is because the government failed Black people. Because what happened? Black people got slavery got abolished in 1865, right? Slavery got abolished. The 14th and the 15th Amendment, so the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were implemented. 13th Amendment says slavery is completely illegal in from now on. For 14th Amendment is the equal protection rights, and the 15th Amendment is the right to vote. These amendments were implementing the US Constitution in the 1870s. What does it mean? It means that now Black people were full legal citizens of the United States. So when a local and regional or state government oppress them, it is the role of the federal government to step up to protect their rights.
Like
But
what
what the
happened
federal
with this?
government,
Like what happened with the Civil Rights Act in the '60s?
right? And but before that, what the federal government did, they say, hey, they play they play which card? State rights card. Hey guys, we can step in. 10th Amendment prevents us from doing so. Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, same thing. So you see that there was a structure. That's why.
And we see
And
there was a shift, right? Too with Reconstruction during the era of Reconstruction, you did have initially a lot of African Americans getting voted into places of power within
yeah,
in southern states, getting elected to Congress, getting elected to the Senate. After Reconstruction, you did see this implementation of Jim Crow, where that kind of disappeared for like 100 years or so, where you didn't have any African Americans getting elected to Congress. Uh, what, what I want to what I want to shift to is you brought up France, right? You brought up France. You brought up
yeah.
French. You brought up French
I know
politics.
you love French politics,
Yeah.
and I know
Listen,
where this is going already.
we need to talk about French politics. When's the next French election coming up? Is that
Next year,
next year, right?
yeah,
Next year
2022.
we have Macron. He's probably going to run for re-election.
Absolutely.
What do you think his prospects are? Uh,
So
well, a few things. What do you think his prospects are? What do you think? Has Marine Le Pen announced that she'll run again? I think she did, right?
no, and that's where I actually want to get into. But go ahead, finish up your.
Yeah. So is Marine Le Pen going to run again? What are her prospects? And I think it has been announced that the infamous Jean-Luc Mélenchon is indeed going to run again. What are his prospects in the upcoming French election?
Okay, so the prospect of Macron depends on who is going to end up against, because French people have that tendency of uh, the voting punishment model.
Hmm.
So the voting punishment is they're going to vote against your opponent just because they don't like you. So they punish you. And that's how Macron got to power. Macron didn't win because he had a good program. Macron didn't win because he was exceptional. He won because people don't like Marine Le Pen. So if Macron goes against Marine, he's going to crush her. There is one factor you forgot to mention because you probably don't know, is that Eric Zemmour is probably going to run for president too. And if he does, he may oust Marine Le Pen on the right
So
because he has always criticized
is he
Marine
not
Le
in the
Pen.
same party? He's in a different party than
No,
her.
he's not in the party at all. Pretty much, he's more like a Donald Trump. Like
Mhm.
he will come, he's a populist. He will come, he will yell, saying blah blah blah. Those guys are coming, taking your job. We have too many immigrants. They need to get the hell out of here and blah blah blah. The problem with Marine Le Pen is that her party has become part of the system now. The National Front was before a kind of third party. They were the dissident. They come, they destabilize you. People kind of like them because they were part of because they were like against the system, like we do our own thing. And now this party has been here for so long, they even have like representative in the European Parliament.
Mhm.
So you know that they're clearly part of the system now. She kind of like watered down their hardline views. and she even contradicted herself on the Schengen. Should uh should, for instance, France go back to the franc instead of saying the euros? At first she was against, if at first she was for France going back to the francs, and now she's kind of support the euro. So you see a lot of inconsistencies with Marine Le Pen. Eric Zemmour or François Asselineau are real sovereignist. They want France to stay within its borders. They don't like that Schengen area.
You're against the Schengen.
Yeah, they're completely against all the Schengen laws. They're against Maastricht, all of that. Mélenchon is a little bit like that too, but sometimes Mélenchon is kind of hard to see where he stands, because sometimes he appears as a complete radical, and sometimes he contradicts himself. Like on immigration, he says he's for immigration, and at the same time, he also say that, oh, well, we kind of have to lower our number of immigrants coming here because there's not enough space. Like it, what makes
He's
me,
kind of like a populist left in a way.
yeah, yeah, he's
Very,
exactly, he's a populist
he's
left,
hard
like
left,
he's,
but he also has these populistic elements to him.
yeah, and as you know, like the main left wing populism focuses on class struggle, while right wing populism focuses on culture.
And I think
And
that, and that's still a very strong element in France, the struggle between the classes. I think a lot of people still, when they approach politics, especially working class, middle class people, they approach that with that mentality in the back of their minds. Not as much as the U.S. I think in the U.S., a lot of people who are, who are very poor, so to speak, will go and go vote for a party that doesn't necessarily represent their interests economically, right? But in France, part of the political discourse and the mentality is very focused on class.
oh
Uh,
yeah, absolutely. Even
but-
even when you look at the French Revolution
oh
was
yeah,
a
very
revolution
class
of
based.
class struggle. Even France was, in fact, the
More so than
first.
the U.S. The U.S. was more kind of in a way. I mean, there's always going to be economic factors to a revolution, but in a way, it was more kind of an upper middle class revolution. It was
Yeah,
essentially
exactly.
the elite of the United States, a lot of the elite of the United States, big business owners, big merchants, who were pushing for the revolution in the United
Yeah,
States. Um,
absolutely.
different.
And when you look at France, France, for instance, France is actually the first Western country in Europe to have real communism. Like the French
You would say
Communist
so?
Party. Oh yeah, I mean, not okay. When I say real communism, not as a regime, but the French Communist Party was the biggest communist party in the world after, of course, the USSR.
Yeah. Well,
Like
yeah.
it,
Well, traditionally too, in France, the Communist Party was huge, and in Italy, the Communist Party was very big.
exactly. So it's to come back to the class struggle part. Like when you say it, they take it seriously. That's why, like French people, they're really embedded into that class struggle narrative. Comparing the US, like, at the end of the day, like when you look at, because when you look at the US Revolution and the French Revolution, the US Revolution, yes, there was some class struggle, but it was mainly about taxes.
Exactly right.
While in France, it
Stamp
wasn't about
Act,
taxes. It was
tea
like
tax.
people were hungry, and the king didn't care.
Yeah, they were actually people were actually
Yeah,
sick
it was
and
it was
starving.
brutal.
Yeah. Last French election, it was a big. There was a lot of uncertainty, right, statistically, leading up to the first round. I think after the second round, everybody knew Macron was going to win. That was
Yeah,
not.
Marine was a fool. She
That
was.
was no. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of talk. But we had in that first round, right? We had essentially all of the four candidates get very close numbers to each other, 20 or so percent. Very so Macron and Le Pen, they came up technically on top, but it was actually statistically almost a four-way draw in the first round. We had Mélenchon getting very close to getting to the second round, and then we had Fillon, right? Fillon, who and he was expected to win, right? He was expected at least
Yeah,
the second round. And if he made it to the second round, he was expected to win it, no matter who he went against.
Yeah.
He had a scandal that.
I think Sarkozy might be behind that scandal.
You think so? Well, I think
Oh
so.
yeah, Sarkozy has that tendency to get rid of his political opponents. He did, I think, I have no way of proving this, but I think Sarkozy was also the one behind the scandal of Dominique Strauss-Kahn in 2011, 2012, when Strauss-Kahn got humiliated in front of the world for being accused
Mhm.
of
But then
sexual.
and that was kind of, I think eventually with Shah's Khan, wasn't it found out that it was a fabrication? I can't remember.
Exactly. But it
But
was because
he was
Strauss-Kahn
still
was going to
really.
run in 2012. Because it wasn't supposed to be François Hollande who ran. It was supposed to be Strauss-Kahn.
Mhm.
But Strauss-Kahn, in fact, jeopardized himself a very long time ago. Strauss-Kahn was so arrogant, and he once said in camera that his biggest weakness is women. Done. He shot himself in the foot. People exploit that against him.
Mhm.
And there was one debate where he and Sarkozy had a debate, and he was trying to lecture Sarkozy, and Sarkozy got pretty mad. I think that was in 2004, 2005, when Sarkozy was the Minister of Interior. They had a debate, and Strauss-Kahn was, demeaning Sarkozy, and Sarkozy had always that Napoleon complex. He's a short guy with a big ego, and he always felt that people were, try to dominate him.
Mhm.
So
A lot of
Sarkozy.
people did not like Sarkozy's personality. He had a very
Yeah, I personally like Sarkozy. He's a tough dude. Like, I personally like Sarkozy.
yeah.
In fact, what I like about him was his drive.
Mhm.
Sarkozy is a very driven person,
Well, in a way too, his
and
last name.
Sarkozy did not.
His last name, a lot of
What I
people
say?
thought Sarkozy's last name. It's not a French traditional last name. It's from
No, it's Hungarian.
Hungarian, right? So he
Yeah,
there was that level of people not liking that in France, right? How, to whatever degree, it's hard to say, but there was that level of him not running with not having a French name, that it's going to be held against him, especially being in the Conservative Party there, the right leaning party. Yeah, it was very close with Hollande. He was thought to win until this scandal broke out. His wife ended up essentially having a fake job that he set her up with. What was it? He was like a staff in the European.
yes, yeah, a staff in his cabinet, and
Yeah, something, or in the European Parliament for some person. I
yeah.
can't remember, but she had a fake job she never showed up to, and she got paid, couple, however many tens of thousands of dollars. So that was his undoing. He was expected to win. That kind of led to the opening for Macron. Uh, First round of the presidential election, do you think we're going to have that four-way split
I've
again? Do you think we're going to have a quarter going to the far right, a quarter going to the far left with Mélenchon, and then a quarter going to a centrist candidate like Macron, and then a quarter going to the traditional kind of conservative? Do we think we're going to have that split again, or are we going to go into the first round essentially already knowing what the results of the election are going to be?
the first round may be a little different. I think it might be half and half, because half will go to the center, which means that the socialists will rally behind Macron, and the right, so the Republicans may be uh, uh, split, because so Sarkozy is the kingmaker, and he's the leader of the Republican Party in France, which is
Is
center
he
right.
is he back to being the leader?
Yeah, but he got convicted.
Oh, he
I don't know
did.
if you saw that recently. Yeah, he
I
got
think he
convicted.
did. Yeah. Well, I think I did see that he was going to be charged with
Yeah, no, he got
some
convicted.
kind of
But I mean,
fraud
he's
or
president.
electoral fraud or something.
They're not going to put him behind bars, so to speak. He's just going to be like I don't know, you know.
Pay a fine kind of thing.
Yeah, but Sarkozy hates he hates the National Party, the National Front.
Hmm.
or the Rassemblement National, the National Rally. That's the new name of the Front National. So they
Oh yeah,
might be,
they renamed it. They renamed it.
yeah. You see, like
They're
Marine Le Pen,
rebranding. They're trying to make themselves more palatable and trying to.
exactly.
I don't know if it's gonna work. I don't think.
And that's the thing. I'm not sure either. So I think Macron will has a really strong chance. Honestly, if Marine is running, it's going to be Marine against Macron, and Macron is going to crush her. To change the whole scenario, he has an outsider that is popular enough has to step in to completely shake up the
Do,
political.
do you think Mélenchon could make it to the second round?
The thing with Mélenchon is that it's possible, but Mélenchon is kind of like Marine Le Pen too. He's been around too much and for too long.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, he has
I
actually
don't see.
been. He was when he was very young elected to the
Yeah,
what's it
so
called, their
so
Senate.
I don't know if his candidacy this time will make any substantial difference. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but you
Mhm.
know, and that's the thing in politics. The longer you're around, the less you become, uh, the less you're considered a danger in the sense of shaking things up. You know, and
I
that's
think a lot
and
of
first
people
and that
are. You think? Do you think?
first and that is first and that is one of the reasons why first like in America, that's why Obama was a complete lightning for everyone because he was elected to the Senate. He didn't even do a full term, run for president, and won.
Mhm.
So it happened so fast that people were like, "Oh shoot!" But if Obama was in the Senate for 10 years, he ran.
You don't think
You
the
see,
same
wouldn't be.
enthusiasm would have been?
Yeah, exactly. The effect wouldn't be the same. So when you look at Marine and Mélenchon, they've been in for a very long time too. So both of them, either is Mélenchon against Macron or Marine against Macron. I don't see any. I don't see them making any substantial change. But I think if it's an outsider, a populist, an outsider that it's with neither party that runs against Macron, he could create some damages. He could destabilize.
It'd be
But now, if
interesting to see.
between Mélenchon, but now between Mélenchon and Marine, who will have a stronger chance of beating Macron? I would say Mélenchon because Marine.
So, man,
I have to say that uh, Mélenchon has been a little more consistent than Marine. Marine she's been more inconsistent and she watered down too much. So
exactement. All right, Germinal. This was a good talk.
of course, man. Thank you.
I'm
Thank you
out
for
of.
having.
Well, I'm gonna end it because I'm actually out of data on
Okay.
my hotspot. I ended up going over the limit, but this was the limit for fast internet, so it's kind of getting a
Yeah.
little grainy now. But all right, Germs. I will thank you for joining. It was a
Of
good
course.
talk,
Of
informative.
course.
I hope the audience enjoys it, and we're going to have more coming up. Right, we'll do some data analysis
Oh
together.
yeah, we do some data analysis. You know how it is. So yeah, let's schedule that for next week or something.
Yeah, we'll work on scheduling it.
Yeah,
All right.
definitely. Okay, John. Thanks for having me.
Au revoir. I'll stop the recording now.
All right.